What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more J-drama score, and we're going to listen to another track from Lieutenant Fukuie's Greeting. In the moment, I'm forgetting the name of the artist for the soundtrack. Let me check. It should be relatively easy to do, because I have my YouTube studio open, and it's Yokoyama Masaru. So yes, ultimately this is a show that's from 2014. There was an earlier one-off J-drama TV movie which featured a different character or a different actress playing the main character and was a single episode production. And then a few years later, this drama came along and fleshed out the story of Lieutenant Fukuie to 10 episodes. I won't give the full explanation again because I know I talked about it in a couple of the previous reactions, but she's essentially the Japanese Columbo. She gets at the truth of matters by questioning people and being persistent, and every time the suspect, who you know from the beginning, meaning the story is a how catch 'em rather than a who done it, meaning we, the audience, see the murder and we know who it is the whole episode, and it's a question of how Fukuie is going to figure out the truth. And oftentimes, in basically every episode, the police division she works for, and for which she is one of a handful of detectives, and who her superior is often annoyed by because he feels like she doesn't follow his orders and so on. But yes, oftentimes what the division at large is thinking about who's responsible is different from what Fukuie is thinking, and there's tension there, but in the end she almost always gets proved correct in terms of who she suspects is the actual killer. And the track we're going to hear is called The Perpetrator's Back, and she, meaning Fukuie, often over the course of an episode will interview the person we know is actually the murderer multiple times. And as the episode will go along, and as Fukuie becomes increasingly convinced of what's happening, there will be a moment where there's a bit of a confrontation, where she basically puts her cards on the table and indicates to the person that she's certain that they are the ones who've committed the crime. And in a few variants, I mentioned before, this score, this soundtrack, has like 4 or 5 track types, of which there are multiple versions for each one. So there's 30 tracks in the soundtrack, and I would say 20 to 24 of those are different variants of the same 4 or 5 tunes. There's a few tracks which are sort of one-off and they're not like anything else, but again, most of the soundtrack are these clusters of tracks, and The Perpetrator's Back is one variant of a cluster that have these, that has, my conjugation there got confusing, but essentially this cluster of tracks are these ambient tunes which have this down-tempo gravity and this very heavy feeling. And of those, I think maybe this one is my favorite. Ultimately, it speaks to the moral certainty and the deductive conviction of Fukuie in terms of the serious, solemn nature of it, but also there's the drama that is conveyed in this moment of confrontation when you often hear this track. And I always think of, I think it's the second episode, there's a moment where Fukuie is waiting for the perpetrator. It might be the third episode, but essentially she's waiting at this place, and the perpetrator's talking to people, again, trying to play it off like she's normal, and she comes around the corner and Fukuie is waiting there, and this track is playing. And in all these ambient, deep gravity sort of tracks, there's this deep pulse. It's not really like a beat because they're spread out, but there's this deep pulse. And about halfway through this tune, it's about 2 minutes long, a little more than a minute in, there's this moment where one of those pulses comes and it really sort of shifts and becomes even more dramatic. Now, in the setup of my audio reactions, the room sound, you won't hear the force of that moment quite as powerfully as you would with headphones on. So if you get a chance to get your hands on this soundtrack, I highly encourage you. If you're really, really curious, send me an email. I can help you with that. But the point is, there's a moment about halfway through this tune where it just goes to another level. And when I first heard it here in soundtrack form, I had already enjoyed the track from the show. Again, the whole soundtrack is great. But when I first heard this track after getting the soundtrack, it just blew my mind. It was like, oh my god, like the power of that moment just sort of gripped my brain. So with no further ado, let's give it a listen. This is by Yokoyama Masaru from the soundtrack to Lieutenant Fukuie's Greeting. It is the track The Perpetrator's Back. Incredible, powerful, and it's a more complicated score track in that it's not just a simple violin line that it's a very catchy melody that you immediately latch onto. It's a bit more not arrhythmic. There's a rhythm to it and there's a in time pace to it, but it's very sparing. Just a piano touch here, a deep piano chord there, that sort of kick drum pulse that occasionally comes in and especially features prominently in the back half of the tune after that transitional moment, which again you could feel it here, but I'm telling you, with headphones on, it's like the instantaneous and very focused power of that moment is quite stunning. And yes, ultimately there's a bit of a muffled drum rhythm that comes in the second half, but all the elements, there's like a plucked string element, all of them are sparing and occasional. So it's like, I imagine composing a piece like this requires a bit more understanding than writing a piano or a violin line that just fits nice bar to bar, measure to measure. You like intuitively you know where it's going to go up and come back down and so on. This is a more sparing and delicately arranged type of composition, as it hits my brain anyway. So again, like very compelling score for an awesome show. Admittedly, not a show that has the reputation or the international success of something like Hanayori Dango or My Boss, My Hero. So it's a lesser known J-drama among those I'm familiar with, but I think it is really worthwhile. Now, over the course of the show, there's some errors here and there with the subtitles. It's not by any means the worst I've seen, but again, like watching J-dramas as someone who does not speak fluent Japanese, there's always that question of like how good are the subtitles are going to be, or how good will they be. In this case, I'd give it a solid B+. It's not, flawless. There are some J-dramas I have where there's virtually no mistakes over the course of all the episodes. There's some others I have where maybe after 1 or 2 episodes of very good subtitles, it goes down to a mediocre level where there's a lot of grammatical issues and like weird translations. But this one is, I would say, in like a 1B tier. It's just slightly below those flawless ones. So yeah, if you get a chance to get your hands on this box set, which again I will always recommend the Malaysian DVD version editions of these J-dramas. They're internationally available. They have subtitles in English and also Chinese, and at least in the early years also Malaysian, as you might expect. But yes, they provide very good translations on the whole, especially once you get past maybe like 2011, 2012, when clearly maybe the success of these international box sets allowed them to start hiring better subtitle teams. But yes, if you get your hands on a copy of Lieutenant Fukuie's Greeting from 2014, you won't be disappointed. Shout out to Ray Dan, who plays the Fukuie character. She's fantastic, as well as the actor here, whose name I'm blanking on. Is it Godon? Yeah, Godon Inagami. Yeah, he plays her boss, who again is often frustrated with her seeming unwillingness to follow his simple orders, but in the end he allows her a greater degree of freedom and liberal use of division resources because he knows in a lot of cases she actually figures things out and she's very good at what she does. So, top show. Let me know what you think of the tune. I will see you next time. Peace.